All right, so yes, I'm Nick. I am a brand designer here at Canva. I've been here for around about 2 years, and I've had a pretty varied career path. I used to work at Apple actually as a software trainer, and I sort of pursued a career in design after that, and have sort of been straddling this line between design and education and technology ever since, which are kind of my three passions. So yeah, I'm really excited to be able to share what I've learned over, I guess, probably almost a decade of design and branding. So we've got three designs today to kind of work through, and I'm hopefully going to be able to just give you guys some really simple tips to kind of clean up designs and maybe get you thinking about certain design principles that might help you, when you're putting your designs together and sort of composing things together. So with that said, we'll jump into the first of three today, which is from Niti. Hi, Niti. And yes, very excited you get to have your third design featured on our show. So it's really, really cool. And I believe what we have here is, well, actually, maybe you can tell us in the chat, Niti, what you were intending with this design here. I'm assuming it's either a flyer, maybe you wanted to print it, or perhaps you wanted to use this as a social media graphic and put it online. But it's obviously some kind of advertisement for your business, I'm assuming. So yes, hopefully I can give you some tips to make it just a little bit maybe easier to read and that sort of thing. Oh, not for print, Nikki says. Okay, cool. So it's obviously a digital graphic, that's okay. That's all very good. For WhatsApp message. Okay, awesome. All right, so let's jump in. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm already in the editor here with Niti's design open. And the first thing that I think everyone should always do whenever you're working on a new design is create a copy on another page. So I'm going to do that now. There's a little button up here, duplicate page. So now I can obviously compare how I'm going. So this is really handy if you are exploring lots of different directions. Each time you sort of start to explore a whole new path, it's a great idea just to create another copy. I mean, you can have as many copies as you want. It definitely helps you compare and make sure that each time you make a design decision, you're actually moving in the right direction and not the wrong direction. Even with a lot of experience, you still find yourself experimenting and making decisions and then checking it against your old version and saying, actually, I've made it worse. I've not made it better at all. And you have to go back again. So it's very much a kind of trial and error process. So this is just a really good best practice to always make copies. So in this design here, I'm not going to change too much here. I think the main things I want to do are just around cleaning up the type, so the spacing and the alignment, and just sort of like grouping a few things together to make it a little bit easier to understand and read. So the first thing here is we've obviously got this headline here, and we've got a sub-headline, and then we have a whole bunch of more information down the bottom here. So this is obviously the biggest piece of type on the page. So obviously that's what I'm going to read first. But when it gets down to here, this is all a little bit confusing as to what I should be reading next. The hierarchy isn't quite, I guess, obvious. So I'm just going to see if I can make that a little bit more obvious. And also with this image here, it's a great photo. I'm going to maybe just move this image out a little bit. So I might start with that actually. I'm going to make this image a little bit bigger and just pull it off the page a little bit, which just creates a little bit more interest. So when you have objects that bleed all the way off the page, you can see obviously this brush stroke is doing the same kind of thing. It can create a little bit more interest in your design. And obviously with text and things like that, you want to make sure that's not bleeding off the page because then you can't read it. But with images, you can certainly start to do things like that to create a little bit more interest. And then the next thing I want to do here is with the subtitle. You can see the spacing between in the title and the subtitle is a little bit tight. So I'm just going to pull this down a little bit, just so there's kind of a similar spacing between these two pieces of text. So that started to look a little bit better. I might even pull this over a little bit more. And So now we just want to deal with this bottom section here. So we've obviously got a bunch of contact information down here. And I can see you've used the Zoom logo here to obviously call out the fact that you're doing consultations over Zoom, which is awesome. I think that's important to have, but I reckon we might be able to clean it up just a little bit. So what I might do is, first of all, let's just get rid of, we'll ungroup this, and I'm going to get rid of this on Zoom part. I'm going to move the Zoom logo over so it's in line with the rest of the type. And I think we might actually just get rid of this brush stroke. I think it's just a little bit distracting at this point as a sort of an extra kind of random element. So I might get rid of that and pull this over here. And we'll just align this to the left. So it's all kind of sitting next to that Zoom logo. And obviously we've taken away the Zoom text. So maybe we can add that back in here. So book your free Zoom consultation today. So that's making a bit more sense. And what I might also do is just change the text color here. So maybe we can, so we've obviously got this white text, which is for your headline. It's quite attention grabbing, but down here, we want to create a bit of contrast in the hierarchy. So maybe we can change the type color here. I'm going to go with just with black, and we'll do the same here as well. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better now. And what I'm actually doing here is kind of employing a design principle, which is called proximity. And proximity just means you take the information that belongs together and you group it together. So obviously all of the contact information, the sort of smaller messaging, all of this belongs in a separate little group away from the headline and the subheadline. So I'm sort of just trying to group the information that makes sense together. And that just sort of helps, whenever someone's reading this design, helps them kind of interpret what's going on. So maybe I need to lock this background actually. So there's a move. And move this down a little bit more. So we'll move it down right onto the margin. So you can see here, let's turn on our margin. So we've got a file, show margin. You can see here this margin running around the edge of the page. Just want to make sure that everything's kind of neatly kind of within that margin, which just provides enough clear space around the design. And I'm just thinking now, this text is probably a little too dark. Maybe we can go for, something like this, or even just this neutral color here, just so it's a little less stark. And that looks a little bit nicer. All right, so that's already looking quite a bit better. I think it's just cleaning it up a little bit. You could sort of keep tweaking from here and making it a little bit maybe more, playing with the text and just kind of refining it a little bit further if you wanted to. Probably the only last thing I might try doing here, I'm just going to unlock that background object. So the background color here, this kind of like violet pinkish hue, it's quite light. And I'm just a little worried that the contrast between the white lettering and that light pink color, it doesn't quite pop enough. So if we just make this color a little darker, and I'll show you a really neat trick for doing this. So I don't actually want to change the color so much. I just want to make the color darker. So there's a really easy way to do that. If we come into the color panel here, and you can see this is the color that I've currently chosen, so it's magenta. If we hit the plus button here, it brings up that same magenta color in a color spectrum, so the spectrum tool, and you can actually just pull it down to kind of increase the tint. So that actually just adds more black to the color. So I just want to bring it down a little bit. Maybe there. And you can see, okay, so we go back to the beginning here. That's where we started, and here's where we are now. Just creating a little bit more contrast. Let's turn off the margins. So there's where we started, and that's where we are now. All right, so I think that's already just making a little bit more sense. The composition's kind of a little bit easier to interpret and to read. So yeah, I might leave that one there. And what we worked on in this design is we looked at the alignment. We looked at the spacing between the type in the line letter spacing and line spacing. We looked at contrast, and we also looked at proximity, which is this idea that you group information that's similar together. Excellent. All right, so that's the end of the first design with Nitty. Let's have a look at what we have next. So design number 2 is from Vanessa, and Vanessa has a nice graphic here. I'm actually a little unsure of what this is to be used for. I think it's for an Instagram story, perhaps, because I know we have a video in here. This really, really cute pug here being Pat, and he's adorable. And I'm assuming by using a piece of video here, maybe Vanessa's going for maybe an Instagram story, or some kind of ad for Instagram. But feel free to let us know what you were planning to use it for, Vanessa, and maybe I can help interpret how you wanted to actually apply it. But yes, we've got quite a lot going on here. Obviously, there's a couple of there's 2 different images. There's quite a lot of typography, a lot of elements going on. So I'm going to see if I can make another version of this and maybe clean it up a little bit and turn it into something that's really nice and easy for the reader to interpret. Yes, right. And Vanessa says it is an IG story.
An IG story.
Yes. Awesome, fantastic. Okay, well that's perfect. All right, so what I'm going to do for this one, I'm going to look at a few things, but I think the main thing I want to focus on is typography. So there's a few things here that jump out to me in terms of the type that's been chosen and how it's been applied. So we're going to focus on that, and I'm also going to just do a bit of layout adjustment as well, just to help, I guess, break up the 2 parts of the design. So there's sort of the top half and the bottom half, which feel very sort of like 2 separate messages, and I'm just going to do a bit of work to kind of help break them apart. And yeah, we'll see how we go. So the first thing I want to look at is typography. So if you guys will notice here on this design, we have this curve type, which is a serif font. So for those of you who don't know, a serif font is typography that has these almost like little feet or kind of decorative kind of elements that stick off the edges of the letters. So you can see on the edges of the S and the L, you have these tiny little pointy bits that stick out. So these are serifs, and we have a whole bunch of other styles on top of serifs, which we're going to have a look at in a moment. But we've got down here another type, which is our sans serif. So you can see this is a much straighter font. There's no little decorative edges to the letters. And then we have this one here, which is a script or a display typeface. And then finally down the bottom here, we've got another one, which is, so this one's Archivo Narrow. It looks like this one in the middle is Archivo Black. So these are obviously part of the same font family, but then we have this script and we have this serif. So we've actually got essentially 4 different pieces of different typography on the page, which I think is probably a little bit too much. Usually we want to have maximum 2 fonts on your design, maybe 3. You can sometimes get away with 3, but you usually try and stick with two fonts. So I'm going to try and simplify that a little bit. The other thing I want to do is, you can see this curve text here, at least for me, it's quite difficult to read. And that's because it is in this serif, lowercase serif typeface. And you can see there's the spacing between the letters is very, very tight as well. So it actually has this kind of disjointed feeling. It's a little hard to actually read it. It's not that legible. So let's see if we can change this up to something that's a little bit more legible. So I'm going to click on this one, and let's see if we can change it to, so what were we using down here? Archivo Narrow. I think that's a good typeface. So I'm going to come up on here and let's choose Archivo Narrow. So it's matching the same font down as the bottom here. And it's also, this is Archivo Black in the middle here. So they're obviously part of the same family. The other thing I'm going to do for this kind of curve type, because you have these are called descenders. So the bottom of the Y and the bottom of the G, they kind of descend beneath or below the baseline of the text. which also gives it this weird feeling. You can see the Y almost touches the photo in the middle. It doesn't look super neat. So I'm actually going to try adjusting this and making it uppercase. And then I'm just going to see if I can kind of start doing some editing here to get this a little bit neater. So let's see if we can first of all make the whole thing a little bit smaller. And so this obviously has a curved text effect applied to it. Let me just see if I can adjust that effect. I'll move my little window out of the way. So I'll bring that up like that. And I might also adjust the spacing here. We'll give it a little bit more letter spacing like this. And we can probably just bring the type down a little bit more. Okay, so that's looking a little bit more legible. I might even just bring that spacing up just a little more. By increasing the letter spacing, it just it makes the letters sort of feel like they're not quite as sort of crowded and crunched up together. And you can really see the shape of this arc now. It kind of follows it in a much more neat, readable, legible way. So that's looking a little bit better so far. So the next thing I want to do for typography here is this text in the middle, this script type is really nice. It's really good for adding kind of like a human kind of organic feel, especially if you've got a message that's maybe either a name or a quote or something very human or personal. Using script typography is really good to sort of reinforce that message. So, you know, I think this is fine for this piece of type here, but you'll probably notice, let me just zoom in a little bit here. So can you see here, each letter, there's a small space in between each letter. So between the B and the O and the O and the U and the U and the T, there's a very small gap. And you can see coming off the O here, can everyone see this tiny little, what's called a ligature? And it's essentially a little joining mark that actually wants to join into the next letter, but it can't because it's too far away. And that's because the letter spacing is just a little bit too wide. So in design, we actually call this tracking or letter spacing. So we want to change the tracking, which basically means we come up here into the spacing area, and we're going to move this letter spacing down and bring it in. You can see here when I bring that in, now all of a sudden, all of those ligatures, so look at the B flows into the O now, and the O flows into the U, and the U flows into the T. It's all connected, like it's all joined together, and it looks really like someone's actually, you know, used a pen and drawn it. So if we have too much letter spacing, we break those ligatures. If we bring it in, the ligatures come together and pull that piece of type into a really beautiful kind of script, which is, I guess it's how it's supposed to look. So that's called tracking or letter spacing. So I think that looks a little bit better. Let's zoom back out here. And what else can we do here? So for me, when I first saw this design, I was a little unsure of what I'm supposed to take away from this piece of communication. And I see we've got the tiny house graphic up here, which looks like a really beautiful photo. And then we're kind of finishing the message with the video of the pug here. So and then we've got this message here, which is, you know, it's like a dog's life. And I think what I actually wanted to do is I think it might work better if we put the dog video inside. It was just swap these images around. So we put the tiny house image down the bottom, and we put the kind of feeling, the emotional part, the video of the dog up in the top here. I'm just going to try that and see how that looks. So let's right click on the background. Whoops. So what I might need to do here is I'm just going to press Command and then click. And what that allows you to do is select objects that are beneath another one. So I'll just show you again. If I click on the top here, I'm actually selecting the text because it's obviously on top of this image, but I want to select the image behind it. So if you hold Command and then click, it selects the image behind it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right click on it, and it's still not going to let me do it, is it? I might actually just need to move this out of the way for a second. There we go. So I want to right click on it and choose detach image. And that pulls the image out from that frame. So I'm just going to pop this down here for the moment. And then I'm going to see if I can move this image, this video into the same frame. So let's pull that up. There we go. All right, and I'm just going to put this text back where it was. It's about there. And let's just see if we can fit this image into this spot here. Make that a little bigger. Okay. So that's getting there. I think by swapping them around, so we've got this bit of text here actually makes a bit more sense. So obviously you've got it right underneath the dog, and then we're finishing with the beautiful image of the house. I think that kind of makes a better story for this piece of communication. So the next thing I want to do here is see if we can just clean up the composition. So we've got this thin bar along the top here, and then we've got another thin bar down the bottom here, which has the final kind of sign off for the website link, which is great. But this bar at the top, I mean, apart from obviously adding a bit of balance, I don't know if it really needs to be there. I think what we can do instead, we can just experiment, pull this up all the way, and we'll see if we can move all of these elements up a little bit. So this whole part is sort of in its own housing shape here. And that feels a little bit more prominent. We've got the middle message and then the image and the final message at the bottom. The last thing I might do here, we've got this kind of beige square or beige rectangle here. Let's see what happens if we get rid of it. We can pull that up a little bit. Okay, so we're getting there. I think the only other thing I want to do here is this piece of type at the bottom. You can see here it's actually not really, it's aligned in the center, but it's actually not aligned vertically within this little rectangle at the bottom. So we just need to move that down a little bit. Like that, so that's now centered. And I might also, just so it matches the uppercase lettering of the title here, I'm going to also make this uppercase. Okay, so now we've changed the lettering here from that serif typography to be this Archivo Narrow, which is the same family as this one, which is Archivo Black. We've just reduced the tracking or the letter spacing on the script type so that all the ligatures work and they all flow together and it looks like a handwritten sort of sentence. We've swapped the images around to sort of help with the narrative of the storytelling. So there's like a dog's life, and then we're finishing with the beautiful image of the tiny home, which I'm assuming is probably part of what you know, we're selling or we're trying to talk about or we're trying to get across. And then we're finishing with the web address at the bottom, which is center aligned as well. So I might stop it there. Hopefully that's a bit of help. Of course, you know, you could take this design and keep working it, keep tweaking it and trying different versions, make more duplicates and see what works. But I think this is already making a little bit more sense. It's a little bit neater and easier to read. Cool. All right. Well, we'll move on to the third and final design next, which is over here from Gael. I hope I'm saying your name right, Gael. But she's obviously a French teacher, which, bonjour. I'm very excited to work on your design, actually. I wish I could speak French, but I speak a little bit of Spanish, but you certainly look like a very fun teacher. So let's see what we can do to help you with your, looks like these are kind of course images, you know, for the different levels within, you know, a language course, which is really fun. So I can see here, we'll actually just quickly flip through all 5 of these. So Gael has put a different color for each level to sort of help with the branding or you know, I guess, you know, differentiating each level from one another. So going through all the levels here, green, orange, purple, but there's always the one consistent blue circle behind there as well. So I really love that. You've got quite a lot of variation going on from one design. And you can very easily continue this on. You can imagine if you had 15 or 20 levels, you can just keep changing the color there and adding the different level. So I'm going to work on maybe just one of these levels, and then we could look at applying it to the others later on. But what we're looking at creating here is like a template that Gael can then use and just change the level and the color and keep going. So bear with me. Let me have a look at what I was going to do here. All right, so I think what I'm going to look at is really three things. So the typography here, I think we're going to look at not only type style, but we're going to look at type setting. And type setting is just really about how you set the type up to fit within a shape or fit within a composition. So you can see here with this main title in the middle here, it almost fits within the circle, but there's just an area here and here where the E and the G are kind of poking off the edge of the circle, and it just feels a bit awkward. So we'll see if we can fix that and kind of set the type in a different way so that it looks nice within this composition. And then we're also going to play with texture. So at the moment, we've got this white background, which, it's fine, it's minimal and clean, but I think maybe we can have a bit more fun by applying a nice background. And I'm also going to use texture in another way for this image of Gael. I'm going to see if I can maybe use a shadow just to make her pop off the page a little bit. And then finally, we'll see what we can do about the level 5 part here, and we'll see if we can create maybe more of like a little, almost like a sticker that gets stuck over the top of the design to indicate what level you're on. So, so let me start by creating a duplicate of this page. So I'll come down here and choose duplicate. There we go. So now I've got the old one and the new one. And let's start with this type in the middle. So Gael has actually applied a text effect here by the looks of it. So I click on this one, I come up to effects. Yes, we can see we've got echo applied here. And it looks like Gael's also applied an effect on this one here. So we've got a neon effect on the level 5 part. So let's see if we can, first of all, work on this main part here. So I'm actually just going to switch this off for now. And we could always come back and apply an effect later on, but I want to see if I can get a nice composition without an effect first. So for me, the first thing is there's actually two parts to this message. Fun French with Gael. So Fun French is sort of the title, with Gael is this sort of subtitle. So at the moment, it's all the same size. I think what we should really try and do is split this apart into two separate lines, Fun French and then with Gael. So let's start by doing that. I'm going to grab the last part here. I'm going to cut that out. And then I'm just going to move this up a little bit. And I'm going to option and then drag, and that actually creates a copy. You can see how that, I'll just show that again. Hold option and then drag, actually pull out another copy. So it creates a copy of the thing that you're dragging. So then I can select the second box here and then paste in my with Gael. So you can see here now I've essentially got the same thing that I started with, but it's split into two separate boxes. So that's going to help me manipulate and work with this type. So let's start with the first part here. I might move that down a little bit. Maybe we can make that smaller just so it's out of the way. So Fun French. I quite like this type, but I think we can probably find something that's going to fit this shape a little bit better. So in this instance, what we want is something that has a little bit more height to it. So it sort of fills up the shape a little bit more. So we get the kind of letters to be as big as possible, but still fitting within that kind of restriction of the top half of this circle. So what I normally use in this instance is something like a condensed font. And a condensed font is essentially when you have letters that are very tall and kind of squished together. So then they're kind of narrow and tall. So if you come over into the fonts here and you type in condensed, you'll actually end up finding a lot of different condensed typefaces. So it's kind of a category in and of itself. So I'll just show you one here, for example. Oh, I've accidentally got an extra box there. Let me get rid of that one. Try that again. Must have copied it a couple of times. So can you see that there? It's not as wide, but it's a little bit taller. I'll just go back. So that's the kind of existing, that was the original font, and the new one's more like that. I'm just going to see if I can find another one here. In fact, I know there's one that I really love. It's called Oval. Let's see if I can find that one. Yes, here we go. So you can see that one is, it's really kind of tall and sort of narrow. So that means I can now make this whole piece of type much bigger. I'm just going to see if I can bring this up a little bit now. All right. So it really fills up that whole space. So that's looking a lot better. The next thing I want to do is with Gael, this second tagline here, because this is her name, and obviously it's a very personal thing, you know, we're essentially learning from Gael. So I think rather than having it in this sort of impersonal capitalized block looking font here, we might use a script font, like in the previous design. We might want to use a beautiful hand-drawn script, which maybe almost looks like Gail signed it personally, you know, as a signature. That feels a lot more personal for a name than something like this. So let's see what we can find in here. So if you come over to fonts, and then you'll see these tags at the top here. I'm going to choose handwriting. So handwriting, script, they're pseudonyms, they're the same thing. And we'll see what we can find in here. There's a lot in here. And sometimes it takes a while to find one that feels right. I actually do have one in mind. So if I choose, for example, school bell, you can see that's hand-drawn, but it looks a little bit childlike and probably not super professional, especially for something like this. So not ideal. Let's try buffalo. So I think this one's fine. It's just, we've got it. The issue here is it's all in capitals. Let's see if we can bring this into lowercase. Okay, I think I might need to retype it, which is okay. Let's retype this. Okay, there we go. And let's make that a little bit bigger. All right. So now we have, I'll pull this down a little bit. We have a slightly different way of communicating that first piece of type. We've got Fun French with Gail, and this is obviously a lot more human and personal now. So I think that's looking a little bit better. I might also just try changing this type to white instead of black. Yeah, I think that could work. And we might have an issue later on if we try to do white type on, say, yellow. It might not pop out enough, but I'll just stick with white for now, and we can explore that later on. Okay, so we're getting there. The next thing I want to do is deal with the level 5 part. Now, Gail has used a text effect for this area here. She's used the neon text effect, which is a really cool new effect in Canva. But I always find neon works best on a black background or a dark background. If you use it on a white background, it kind of looks a bit odd. So just to give you an idea here, if I change the background color, select it, to a dark background, you can see all of a sudden at level 5 looks much better with a dark background behind it. So we might see if we can bring that back in later on, but for now, I'm actually just going to turn off that effect. And what I want to do is I want to see if I can create something that looks almost like you're putting a sticker over the top with the level. So just stamped over the top of the existing typography. We're going to have level 5. So let's take this circle that's in the background here, and we'll reduce this down. Bring it up here. I'm going to also just bring its position forward, so it sits on top of the purple circle. And we might just get rid of that for now. I'm going to reuse this type. So again, Option drag. And let's try adding in, so level. It's a little bit too big. So we'll have level, and then again, option drag. So I'm essentially writing level and then level again, and then we'll just put number 5. But I want the 5 to be much bigger, so I'm going to go like that. Okay, so now again, we've got only two pieces of typography in here, two fonts. I think that's really important. Whereas before we had 3 fonts and it was getting a little bit too much. So we're just sticking with 2 fonts with this so far. So I'll move this down, just bring that a little bit tighter. And the other thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to grab all these elements, the circle and the typography, and I'm just going to group them together. And to make it kind of appear like it's almost like a sticker being sort of stamped on top, I'm just going to rotate a little bit. So it's like that. So there we go. I've got a little bit of a different kind of composition going on now. And kind of got this new little, almost like a badge that's sort of on top of the main logo or the main type. Okay, so it's getting there. There's a couple other things I think we can try here just to make it a little bit more fun. So the main thing for me is this background, this stark white background. I think we might be able to try filling it up with something and making it a little bit more fun. So for those of you who don't know, there is a background tool over here in Canva. So here, it's essentially a library of textures and images and even just colors that are really designed to work nicely as kind of like a backdrop for your design. So, you know, there's all sorts of different things in here. Some of them are very minimal. They're usually designed so that, you know, they don't overtake your whole design, but they kind of just fill the background with something of interest. So I think for this design, given that it's a French course, language class, I might use like a paper texture. You know, maybe it's like a page ripped out of a notebook that I might be using in my class. So let's see if we can find a good paper texture here. And I'm going to just click on it, and it should actually apply it straight to the background. There we go. So this is kind of like a gridded paper. Maybe it's something you might have in a notebook, which kind of looks nice. It's quite fun. So yeah, we might stick with that one. And I might just move these items here. We'll move them over a little bit. And the last thing I'm going to do here with the image of Gael, I'm going to actually see if I can, it looks like we're getting her hands being cut off here. I'm just going to see if I can bring that back. Yep. Okay. And I'm going to see if maybe I can apply a shadow effect to Gail's image so she kind of pops off the page a little bit, just to give it a little bit more depth. So I'm just going to select that image, and I'll come up to effects up here in the top toolbar. And this is a very new app that we have in Canva. If you scroll down to shadows, I'm going to click see all, and I'm going to add a backdrop shadow. We'll just see if this works. It does take a little moment to apply and sort of render. I'll give that a moment. It looks like Gail might have had a filter on this image as well, which is okay. We'll just see if we can rearrange this a little bit here. Oh, there we go. It's starting to come up now. Let me have a look and see what filter we had on this image. So this is the original image. Have a look at filter. Yeah, so it had solar applied here at 68 intensity. So I might actually have to come back just to make this image look the same. Choose filter, solar. There we go. It's looking a bit more similar. So I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's a very subtle shadow coming off the back of Gail here, going in onto the page. So I'll just come back to the original here and the next one. So yeah, that's starting to come together. I think that's starting to look really good now. It's quite interesting. You've got that fun paper element. Gail's kind of popping off the page there. It's a little bit more, I don't know, striking. So yeah, I don't know. There's probably a little bit more to do here to work out what this is going to look like with the other colors. You know, perhaps we would actually keep this text darker rather than lighter. That might work better on some of these other kind of lighter colors. But you know, it might just depend on the color. Maybe mix it up. Maybe sometimes it's white, sometimes it's black. But yes, we've got a pretty interesting looking design there. So what we've done here is just, I've actually added a new element in the page background. We've used the really cool shadows effect to make the image pop off the page a bit more. We've simplified the fonts and gone for a condensed font, which is really kind of squashes it in and adds a bit of height, which makes this title fill the circle a lot better. And then we've used a nice script here as kind of almost like a signature, you know, human kind of touch to the sub headline. And then we've created this new kind of graphic device, if you like. So this is a new, almost like a sticker or a badge, which is almost like it's been stuck over the top, which we can use for all the levels, which is kind of a great way to play with the hierarchy and make it look like it's part of, you know, a series of different images. So that's it for this design. Thanks, Gail. I hope you like that, and I hope that's been helpful. Yes, I think that's brings us to the end of all three designs now. So I might throw it open to a bit of Q&A now and see if there's anyone out there who has any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nick. That was really, really interesting. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat. One of them was from Stacey, who was really appreciating all the terminology that you were using, all the design terms, and wondered if there was a guide, like a go-to reference that you could recommend for the meanings behind the terms that you were using, like serifs and spacing and things like that.
Yes, it's a really good question. They're probably, I actually don't know of a really great, I guess, glossary of terms for design, but it might be one of those things you can sort of just Google to find out more about. So I know that I did find this amazing resource once. Probably not going to be able to find it now for you live, but see if we can find. Well, you're going to be able to find lots of really great articles which talk about the difference between font categories. So, you know, serif versus sans serif, etc. In terms of things like letter spacing, so I know I talked a little bit about tracking, leading, kerning. There's a whole bunch of these terms that refer to how you essentially space out or do typesetting when you're actually setting your type. Back in the days of I guess the Gutenberg press, or pre-press production, where they used to actually take physical letters. They were almost like little blocks, and they would have to align them in a row and create the sentence manually before applying the paper to it. It was an art form called typesetting. So they had all these terms to do with how do you space them apart, the line height, and everything else. So you should be able to find that pretty easily if you just Google some of those terms. So maybe like leading and tracking. Here we go. This is quite a good one. So I think I talked a little bit about ascenders and descenders. So you can see here, this is sort of helping you understand that the part of the letter that sticks up beyond this kind of line, this top line of the lettering, is called an ascender. And then the base line of the lettering, anything that pokes out below that, is called a descender. And then leading is essentially the line height. So there's kind of lots of different terms that designers use. You don't have to worry too much about them. We don't often use them that much inside the Canva product, but I thought it was probably helpful just to get a sense of what they're all about and how they work in design.
Absolutely. I'm just
anyway, hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to pop the website for Design School in the chat panel as well. So there is a course on there called Graphic Design Basics, which will take you through some of those terms as well. And you'll see Nick is the presenter of some of the courses on Design School as well. So there's heaps of courses there that you can check out, which will give you a grounding in all sorts of design terminology and know-how. We do have some more questions. How can you search better through fonts? So what are some tips for searching through fonts? And that ties in with another question that we got as well, as how do you go about choosing the correct font and colors for your design? So maybe you've just got a couple of top tips, Nick, of the first things when you have to choose a font and a color for a particular product or brand. How do you go about that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's also something I'm really passionate about, and it is one of those things that some people that it's choosing fonts is like this kind of dark art. It's it's something that takes years and years of practice to understand. I guess the kind of feeling behind a font. I think the easiest way you can get started is just to remember that fonts have this inherent feeling, like a subtext behind them. And the more you can kind of read into the feeling behind a font, the more you can start to use fonts to reinforce your message and what you're trying to say. So I think a lot of what I was talking about here, in particular with this piece of script typography, was about that kind of human, kind of almost like signature style kind of feeling that I wanted, because it's Gail's name. It's quite personal. So that's a really great way to think about type. It's like, okay, well, I've got this name that I want to write on the page. I'm not going to use some really modern kind of soulless typeface. I want to use something that's more human and personal. So think about what it is that you're trying to say, and then try and find a piece of typography that matches that message. And I think the good thing about Canva's font library, there never used to be a way for you to search for different categories or feelings or tags. You used to have to kind of just scroll through an endless list of fonts and just pick one. But now you can actually search for terms like, if I want something that's really modern, I can just write modern. And it's going to find me, well, contemporary is another word for modern. It's going to find a whole bunch of typefaces that fit that kind of feeling, that essence of that feeling. So again, if you want, want something that's made way more traditional, we'll just search for traditional. And traditional might be more like a, well, it looks like maybe traditional is not a good example. But let's try maybe, I don't know, old. For kind of an old style kind of serif font might be appropriate for a piece of communication. But yeah, try searching for a tag or a feeling within the font library, and you're always going to be able to find something that way a lot quicker than just sort of scrolling endlessly through 1,000 fonts. There's one more great tip that I'm going to share with you. This is a real pro tip here. So I'm going to show you a website. It's called TypeWolf. So we just go to Google, and search for TypeWolf. So this is essentially a blog by a designer. He just spends a lot of time on the internet looking at other people's websites and just highlighting really beautiful uses of typography. And what I love about it is if you find a piece of type that you really like on here, quite often what he'll do is he'll suggest other font pairs that work well with this piece of type. And let's have a look. So this is the font here, Rebond Grotesque. So here's Rebond Grotesque, a little bit about it. And he says, here's some similar fonts. So if you can't find Rebond Grotesque in Canva's library, you might be able to find one that's similar. And he usually also have suggested font pairings. So this works really well with Granette. So already you're able to tap into designers, like done all this research to figure out what works really well. He has some really beautiful examples of type on his website. So TypeWolf, really cool resource.
Fantastic. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more about the first steps in choosing some fonts. That certainly helped me understand it a bit more. We do have another question about the design again, about Gail's design. Stacey was wondering, on the third design, is there a problem or not with Gail's head being cut off by the top of the page?
Yeah, good question. I don't think that it's a problem necessarily. I think obviously on the very first design, we looked at pulling elements slightly off the page just to create, that kind of, sort of bleeds off the edge, creates a bit of interest. I think it's totally okay. It's still, as long as if I was going to do something like this, maybe it would be a bit of a problem. But I think as long as we can see her face, then yeah, I think we're fine. But you have to think about, obviously, if this design was going to be resized for maybe Instagram, then we're going to have to arrange the whole composition so that it all fits within, a square. Maybe we'll just give that a go now. Let's see what happens. So it's taken all my elements, put them onto a new design. We'll come back to the fifth one here. Okay, so you can see here, I'm going to have to do a fair bit of rearranging to get this to fit within a square design. I might not go into all of that right now, but yeah, no, there shouldn't be any issue. Obviously, you can have elements hanging off the edge of a page to create interest, things like that. Yeah, there's no problem.
Great. And we have one last question. Are SVG files editable in other software like Corel, for example?
Yes, they are. Well, actually, Corel it's a good question. I'm not that familiar with Corel. I think it supports vectors, SVGs. So SVG, for those of you who don't know, is a sharp vector graphic file. And what that means is, without getting too technical, I mean, I think it's important to maybe understand some of the technology behind it. So sharp vector graphics here, it's this one. It's a type of image that is not based on pixels. And what I mean by that, in fact, I might even just come over here, because it's one of those concepts that's quite hard to explain with words. But if I search for vector raster, so some of you might have heard of this term before, vector or raster. So vector. So raster is based on pixels. So raster is like a JPEG image, a PNG image. And essentially, if you understand how pixels work, they're essentially just lots of little squares. So to give you an idea here, you can see this example. A raster is like this. If you make your image too big, you stretch it out and zoom in a long way, you start to see the individual squares, the individual pixels on that image, and it starts to look kind of pixelated. Whereas a vector is not based on pixels at all. It's actually based on XY coordinates. So it's essentially done through, it can be scaled to any size, and that XY coordinate, so that point between the top of the V and the bottom of the V, is always drawn perfectly straight. So it doesn't matter how big you can stretch it up and put it on the side of a billboard, and it'll still look really sharp because it's not based on these little boxes, these little pixels. So that's kind of the difference between raster and vector. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Fantastic. I think that takes us to the end of today's session. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick. I certainly learned a lot this session, and I'm sure everybody else did too.
No worries. Thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can interact some more on the Design Circle chat. I'm on there every now and then checking it out. So really appreciate you taking the time to submit your designs. And I hope, I hope it was helpful.
Great. And we'll see you again at another Design Makeover. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.